Auzubillahiminash-shaytanir-rajeem. Bismillahir-rahmanir-rahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to World This Morning. I'm your host Hajra Satti, and joining me is my wonderful co-host who also happens to be my mentor here in PTV World is Fahim Bangesh. Assalamu alaikum Fahim. How are you doing today?
Walaikum assalam Hajra. I'm doing very well, thank you. And I must announce I'm very happy today because I met someone really wonderful yesterday. And imagine, I was just wondering how the company of someone positive, the company of someone who says something that you really want to hear in your life, it can really uplift your mood. It can change the way you think. It can actually make you do things which were stagnant in your life. For example, music, for example, listening, singing, or whatever you want to do. So I practically am very happy today.
Alhamdulillah.
Yes.
Emotions are very contagious, and you will always find that. And some people have a very high aura. You can always find very high vibes, and you can always find very high energy from them. If someone is crying, you will find that you also want to cry. If someone is happy, especially if someone is laughing at a very high pitched tone and a very high pitched laughter, you will also find that you also want to laugh at that. That is because the power of the emotions, and I think human brain is still unable to understand the entirety of the human emotions because they're so powerful. And at the end of the day,
very complex at the same time.
Very complex, and at the end of the day, we are all reduced to what we call in the science energy. So we all emit energies, and I think it's high time that we talk about keeping a positive and a high energy, because today is 24th of October, and this is the day back in 1900s, or I'm forgetting the exact date, but United Nations came into the existence.
I think it was 1945, I presume.
Yes, especially after the World War II. Thank you for assisting me here. And United Nations Day, the theme of this day is dignity, justice and freedom for all. Definitely there are lots of discourses that has been generated. There are lots of lines of inquiries that have been generated to dissect and to talk about what exactly was the purpose of United Nations, and if it is still able to do what it was created for in the first place. There are different schools of thoughts. We are going to expound different lines of inquiries in our show as we proceed further. But I think one thing that I would like to share here is that we are living in a world where it is very difficult to imagine a world without United Nations. Although some people do criticize its functions a lot, but I think there's something in the United Nations which makes it an organization that can make its presence felt when it wants to.
And it does make it makes its presence felt, because we do see it off and on, because obviously we can't have a world which is free of conflict. So definitely wherever something happens or there is a natural disaster, we always see the presence of the United Nations, and we see the presence of different representatives of different countries in the United Nations who come forward and help the people who are actually in need. Now, without further delaying, I think we must introduce our esteemed guest for today.
That's very true, and we would not like to monopolize our conversation, of course. So without any further ado, we are very glad that we have been joined by someone who happens to be former Vice Chief of Air Staff. He was also the former ambassador of Pakistan to Syria. He is Ilal-e-Imtiaz Military, Sitara-e-Imtiaz Military, and Sitara-e-Basalat. We are very glad that we have been joined by Air Marshal Saeed Mohammad Khan Saab. Assalamu alaikum, sir, and thank you so much for coming to our show.
The pleasure is mine.
And a very good morning. It's such an honor to meet you and have you here in our program. Sir, first of all, before we get into the details of the conversation, what importance do you hold in your heart as far as the United Nations is concerned, as far as the observance of the United Nations Day is concerned?
Like Hajra said, we may have all our opinions about United Nations, the way it has behaved for the last 77 years. But it is definitely an organization that has brought a lot of good to the world since its inception. So I think on 24th of October, we must congratulate them and give them strength by standing behind them so that they are able to achieve for what they were actually formed. United Nations, Shehzad, is actually a follow-up of a major organization which was before it, which was known as the League of Nations.
That's true.
Yes.
The American President Woodrow Wilson actually had a vision in which he wanted that, all the countries of the world should get together for world peace. And they formed up the League of Nations after the First World War. Unfortunately, US itself did not join the League of Nations, which became one of the reasons for its failure. But the four major powers of that time, UK, France, Italy and Japan were the permanent members of the League of Nations. But it failed within 10 years because one, United States did not join it, and number two, it failed to get all the countries really behind it because the its own Security Council members were not willing to follow the resolutions passed by them. For example, in Japan in 1933 when Japan invaded Manchuria and when Italy invaded Ethiopia, that was the Security Council of the League of Nations, voted against these aggressions, and yet both the countries did not accept it. And the same thing is happening now in the Security Council resolutions of the United Nations. So we really need to, have a relook at the role and task that was assigned. The spirit has been good. Then the niyat has been good, but unfortunately the implementation needs a lot of improvement.
Right, and let's talk about and let's expound this line of inquiry because United Nations, the creation of the United Nations reflected the post-World War II liberal order, and it has been led by the Western-based liberal order. But now in the 21st century when we talk about it, so there are lots of realities that have changed. For example, there's a climate emergency, then there's a dramatic technological disruptions that we are happening with the introduction of artificial intelligence, obviously escalating conflicts, and obviously global cost of living crisis, which is increasing day by day. So what sort of, do you think that there's a need to reform United Nations? Because President Erdogan has been very vocal about the world leads, the world is bigger than the five, and it is a reference towards the Security Council's permanent members reference, the five members who dominate the agenda in United Nations Security Council.
Hajra, I would slightly like to disagree with you over here. Because this is not the objective of the United Nations, to develop technology or to enhance, technological activities in every country is not the domain of the United Nations. The United Nations was basically created to create peace and security among nations, to enhance human rights, to provide humanitarian aid when the disasters are there, and avoid any or become a part or manage conflicts if any erupt between any two member states. So these are the four principles on which United Nations has been formed, and I suggest that they should remain focused on that, because the world, whether it was the Cold War era or the post-Cold War era, the limited conflicts have always been there. And there is the need of a body and a world opinion on those conflicts.
Now, sir, like you very rightly mentioned, we also know that there are protracted conflicts like the Gaza conflict, we have the issue of Kashmir, and there are United Nations resolutions on it, but we don't really see an actual change, although the intention seems to be good, like you very rightly said, but we don't see a proper action being taken against it, because obviously these issues have been there since decades. And now I think it's high time that they should be resolved, because obviously the purpose, the basic spirit of the United Nations, and as the theme says, the dignity, freedom and justice for all, that doesn't seem to be quite fulfilled.
I fully agree with you, and that is what is the failure of this great organization. Like the League of Nations, the Security Council has become a debating forum, but it has not become an implementing forum. Right? Like the Palestinian issue you mentioned, I mentioned the Kashmir issue. These are the issues which were, the resolutions on them were passed in 1947 and 1949. And since then, the implementation of those resolutions has not been ensured.
That's true.
True.
Right? So, the implementation is the weakness of the United Nations, and that is the area where they should actually be thinking about. The League of Nations broke because the Security Council permanent members did not want to follow the resolutions of the other countries or the Security Council itself, and the same is happening now.
Same is happening, exactly.
Right. So, if one Security Council member, permanent member, he vetoes the resolution, nothing can happen. So, that becomes one of the major reasons for inactivity of United Nations. And I am sure, you know, a lot of Secretary Generals of the United Nations have actually tried to diversify the activities of United Nations, like Kofi Annan and Boutros Ghali. You know, all of them, you know, they, instead of becoming mediators in the conflicts, they actually went towards peacekeeping and, you know, creating funds for earthquakes and floods, right? So, they also created organizations like UNESCO, where they went into education and food, you know, health organization and World Food Programs and other things. So, yes, the United Nations has been very effective in areas other than conflicts.
That's true.
But the main aim was to have peace and security in the world.
In the world.
That's true.
So, they have to come back to for what they were formed, and I am sure a lot of debate has been going on for a long time, and now it is time to conclude the debate and take some concrete actions.
Right, and let's focus on cutting the Guardian knot, which is obviously the veto power, and you alluded to it before, and that's a very problematic, I mean, powers, because there's lots of inquiry that has been generated. And when we talk about Security Council reforms, so lots of people, lots of countries, they're asking for the representation. For example, a neighboring country, India, is asking for it.
Yes.
And then from the African continent, South Africa and Nigeria, they're also asking for the representation in the Permanent Council. So, but what exactly in your mind is a more refined form of the Security Council reforms when we talk about?
First of all, you know, being a, you know, after looking at how United Nations has behaved in the 77 years, you know, I as an individual would strongly oppose the increasing of the strength of the permanent members of the Security Council.
Okay.
Because already 5 countries have, you know, not followed the resolutions, and they're having more permanent members would only add to the problems that is already there. So, I do not agree, you know, as an individual, that the Security Council membership should be increased. I think the present setup of having permanent and non-permanent members is okay. What is most important is that we really need to look at the implementation of the resolutions that are passed. Now, like I said, like if there are 15 members of the Security Council, now if 14 members vote on one side and 1 member votes on the other side, but that 1 member is a permanent member, then the resolution does not hold any value.
That's
Yes.
true.
So, I think I would suggest that we should look at this. If the majority of the Security Council or the majority of the permanent members, they vote for one side, for one resolution, then that resolution should be accepted, even if it is to be opposed by at least 2 permanent members.
Right.
So, if the majority of the Security Council members or the majority of the General Assembly members, they vote for a resolution, that resolution should be adopted. That is step 1. But another area which Hajra has very rightly highlighted is that there should be a methodology of implementation of that resolution.
True.
Right? If a lot of killing today is going on in Palestine, a few years ago or just the previous year, a lot of killing went on in Kashmir. For the last 77 years, Kashmir is an outstanding issue at the United Nations. Now, the resolution is there, but its implementation is in limbo.
Yes.
So, what is the use? The people are dying for the last 77 years.
True.
So, we really, the United Nations and its members should really look at it, that how can we ensure the implementation of the world's majority opinion. So, when the world in a majority says, because United Nations biggest strength is that nearly all the countries of the world are its members, including Vatican and Palestine, which are the which are not permanent members, they are observers. But then they represent the whole world. And if the world is thinking in one direction, then that opinion must be respected by the people of the world.
That opinion should matter. Yes.
And that is where I think the United Nations today, you know, on its 78th anniversary must think of it, that, you know, the world looks at us, you know, with hope, and they should be able to find a resolution to this issue. Just one last word. Remember, it is not the powerful who look for resolutions, it is the weak who look for resolutions. So, it is the weaker countries of the world who take pride in being the members of the United Nations, and they look at the United Nations that their just and right stance against the stronger party is respected.
Yes.
And the world as a whole is a good place to live in. So, when the world opinion is in favor of the right, that rights must be respected by the stronger party.
Hence, we can truly say in a greater essence that dignity, justice and freedom for all, right?
Exactly. You very beautifully put it, that people look up to, especially the developing countries, the underdeveloped world, they look up to the United Nations, feel proud of their presence, their voice in the United Nations. Definitely, you beautifully put it there. We also know, sir, that Pakistan has contributed a lot when it comes to United Nations peacekeeping missions abroad in different countries. The Pakistan Armed Forces have contributed a lot. People have sacrificed their lives as well. Now, when we talk about Pakistan, and it's because Pakistan has been directly involved with the United Nations, where does Pakistan stand today if we talk about the whole world, in the entirety of the world? If we look at Pakistan, it stands in the middle, the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc. So where does Pakistan stand basically? What's the position of Pakistan if we talk about geopolitics?
I think Shahzad, Pakistan is a country that is respected all over the world, and especially within the Muslim world. We are respected as a country which has gone through tough times, but has come out very strongly out of those tough times. The Muslim world looks at us with lot of pride and a lot of hope. Since we held the first Islamic conference in Pakistan, somehow or the other in the minds of the Muslim world, Pakistan is a leader, right? And that is the role that we must never forget, right? We must stand up for all the right Muslim causes, including Kashmir and Palestine.
True.
And we must be seen as leading the flock, not being a part of the flock.
That's true.
Right? People don't expect us to be a part of the crowd. People expect us that we should be able to lead them towards something better. So, I think the Pakistan Foreign Office, as well as all the governments of Pakistan, have a great duty to fulfill. Pakistan is not a country to be overlooked.
That's true.
We are strong enough to be considered. We are big enough to be considered. And I think we are just a little shy of using our influence.
That's true. Fahim, now let's talk about the Blue Helmets deployment, because we have expounded this line of inquiry where we were talking about deconstructing a lot of things that United Nations has been doing. So let's talk about some of the success stories. And like you mentioned, Pakistan contributes a huge amount of its law enforcement agencies towards the peacekeeping missions. And there were some success stories too. For example, the way United Nations intervened in the Kosovo-Serbia conflict, and they were able to resolve that situation. Obviously, after some time, the situation does get inflamed, but we did not see a major conflict erupting up. So when, sir, we talk about the successes of the United Nations or the importance of United Nations, let's talk about the climate emergency, because the entire humanity is facing that. In Pakistan, we've seen last year how vulnerable we were. And so what sort of role do you think United Nations can play in convening or summoning or making sure that all the nations understand the emergency of this crisis?
Adding to this, the United Nations Secretary General, he did mention in categoric terms that we have reached a climate boiling point, right? we've reached that sort of emergency. We still have a bit of time where we can go back and restore the planet's health, but it's a very precarious sort of a situation that we're living.
And we are one country which is highly affected by the climate change.
Vulnerable to it.
Hajra, I think the United Nations and all the major countries of the world are quite, they understand the effects of the climate change, and I think the United Nations is already, spearheading the campaign against, the things that are increasing, climate effects, and United Nations remains a forum where all the countries of the world are, and that is the place from where we can educate all the countries on the effects of climate change. So yes, I fully agree with you. United Nations must take it up as a banner. They must lead the campaign, because it is not a country that is at stake, it is the world which is at stake, right? So we really need to take it as a world issue and then move forward.
But United Nations is taking an initiative. So we see COP conferences coming up every year, but we don't see that talk catapulting into proper action, right? We need to walk that
Again,
talk.
we've come back to the area where we say there is lack
because
of...
the countries that are getting affected are not the strong countries.
Yeah.
They are the weaker countries. So that is where, like Hajra, the United Nations must decide as a forum where the strong and the weak countries are there, that they are looking at solutions that have a world effect. So they are not looking at countries, they are looking at the effect that is happening in the world, and they are countering that.
That's true.
So, the United Nations also has to change its thinking. They don't have to look back at, their major donors and think that how do they think. They have to, lead the world in that direction where the world should be going to. And they have done it before. They have done it in education. They have done it in peacekeeping. They have done in many other areas also. So leading the countries to a specific goal is not unknown, is not an unknown role to United Nations. They can do this role, and Hajra, like you are saying, they must take over this mantle now and more forcefully.
And I would also like to pick up or touch something, an institution which is obviously a part of the United Nations, which is the Bretton Woods system and the formation of World Bank and IMF, and the way they function, the way their policies are hinged around. Obviously, they reflect the realities of the post-war, World War II liberal order, but they need reforms. And when we talk about climate emergencies, I think they need massive reforms because the countries, the global south, countries like Pakistan, they are in the dire need of, they should not have a very strong and stringent austerity policy. So for example, last year, we suffered $40 billion of the climate losses. And that is something which is not of our own making, right? So do you think that there is a need to reform this Bretton Woods system, which falls under the jurisdiction of United Nations?
Adding on to this, because I also believe that since we were talking earlier, the sovereignty of the nation, basically the identity of the nation, the pride of the nation, it takes away that too.
Yes, absolutely. So there are no two opinions about it. What Hajra is saying makes all logical sense, and that should be the let's say direction, way forward. I think this should be one of the resolutions which the United Nations Secretary General should be making today in the General Assembly. He should be making.
And what sort of reforms do you envision when we talk about Bretton Woods system, reforming them, the IMF, the World Bank? Because they're often hijacked by the powerful parties where they are playing power politics instead of supporting the poverty reduction programs in the global south.
I think like you said, let's say they should have a resolution on climate change, and then they should have a fund for climate change, so that where the countries who suffer because of climate changes that are coming on, they should be able to provide them aid and support, and maybe even loan, to come out of those crises. If you see that we used to have floods in Pakistan every 4-5th year or so, but since the climate change has come in, we are having floods every year. Right? So for the last 2 years, we have had major floods, and we expect the same would happen in 2024 too. So it means it is a constant, problem for Pakistan. So we are either the first biggest country to get affected or the second biggest country to get affected. So we really need to, the World Bank, which is a part of the United Nations, should be then able to, you know, have a special fund, and they should be able to do that. Like the World Bank helped us make Darbela, and so they should help us in making dams, they should help us in, you know, other things, and maybe half of that can be an aid and half of that can be a loan, you know, and they should provide, you know, they should offer choices to the countries that are getting affected.
Just the intention should be there, the ways can come, the implementation methods can come.
You see, everyone understands that the climate change is not coming because of the countries that are getting affected. It is getting, actually, the climate change is coming because the big powers have not respected the, you know,
the nature's way of system. Yes.
Right. So they are responsible. So they should actually be paying for their follies.
And act more responsibly, right, sir? Well, thank you very much. I would like to thank you, and it has been an honor talking to you and having you in our show.
I think one last question, because it's an important question. I'm sorry, I'm interjecting here. So when we talk about reforming the United Nations, obviously it is led by the very powerful Western-backed liberal agenda. But do you think with the rising balance of power that we are seeing, with the rise of China, with the rise of a multipolar world in which Russia is one power, where the US is one bloc, one power, we would see a more effective United Nations, because there's a competition between these three nations that are very powerful.
I agree with you. You know, I think a bipolar world will be far more stable than a unipolar world.
Right, that's true.
Right, and China has come up with a new form of development, and they have actually manifested it in Africa. In the early 2000s, and now they are doing it all over the world through economic development, right? So we don't need to actually go and capture a country and rule over it. They can become our allies also through economic development.
That's true.
And in that way, the world becomes a better place to live, and everyone is happy because everyone is getting what they want.
Because that's exactly what the Chinese premier also said when the Prime Minister visited, that we're not looking forward to any colonization anymore.
That's very true, and thank you so much, sir, for coming here, for having this wonderful cross-pollination of the ideas and reflecting and pontificating over the existence of United Nations. And as I mentioned before, that United Nations, it's a very difficult to imagine a world where United Nations does not exist. It does have its flaws. There are lots of requirement of the reforms in the United Nations, but on the other hand, it has done a lot of development projects. It has undertaken lots of work that has complemented and that has uplifted the lives of many people, and we will continue to have this conversation. So after a short break, don't go anywhere, because we have an interesting conversation lined.
Welcome back to World This Morning with Hajra Sati and Fahim Bangush. And earlier we were having a very interesting conversation, as today is the UN Day, but also today we are observing the Polio Eradication Day. Obviously, we know that polio is something, the polio virus is only found in just 2 of the countries in the entire world. The world is trying to get rid of polio, so is Pakistan trying its best. We do see the polio immunization campaigns every year. We do see the robust campaigning by the government of Pakistan, also the provincial governments, which try its level best so as to immunize the children who are all under the age of 5, and so far the government is doing a good job. But we do see off and on 1 or 2 cases emerging in the country, but of course eventually they are going to alleviate and evaporate from the country, hopefully in the coming years, and Pakistan is going to be a polio-free country.
Right, and the theme of this today's World Polio Eradication Day is Together We End Polio, and obviously this is the need of the hour, that
Inshallah.
we eradicate and eliminate this disease. And because the state is continuously making some efforts, but obviously there are hurdles in terms of the fluidity in the cross-border movement between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which has always contributed towards the increase in the cases. But let's now move towards another, because there's so many days coming today, and we have seen this overlapping of the things. So today happens to be, or this week also happens to be respiratory week. And what exactly is the importance of the respiratory therapy, and what exactly does that mean as a layperson? We would like to introduce our guest and kickstart a conversation. So we're very glad that we have been joined by Ms. Fatma Rahman. She happens to be a senior respiratory therapist. Assalamu alaikum, Fatma, and welcome to our show.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you so much.
Right. So Fatma, please tell us the importance of this ongoing respiratory care week. What does that mean? Because when we talk about respiratory, the first thing that hits my mind is related to your oxygen flows and something like that. So please, we are all ears.
This respiratory care week is celebrated annually, basically in the last week of October, which can be onward from 20th of October. This week is specially dedicated to all the respiratory therapists working across the world to honor and appreciate their dedications toward patient care and health care, to raise awareness what a respiratory therapist is, because in Pakistan many people don't know what a respiratory therapist basically is. It is a new term for many people, even in our hospital as well. So this respiratory care week, we ourselves, we work for raising awareness for our field, for our patients' health, for lung health, and obviously for the recognition.
Also, we've seen that intensive care units particularly require the presence of the respiratory therapist. Could you highlight the role of respiratory therapist there?
There's a very specialized role of respiratory therapist in intensive care units. Basically, our main role is in critical care, which is obviously intensive care units. Patients are where mostly patients are on ventilator, which is artificial lung.
Right.
So we manage patient from the day they are on the vent till the day they are off vent, and in between all kinds of care. After vent, we manage, obviously, if the patient is on oxygen or any kind of artificial machine, we manage patient's breathing on that. So main role is in obviously intensive care unit, but obviously outside the ICU, there are many roles in diagnostics and many kind of tests which are therapeutic and diagnostics. Other than that, we can do sleep studies.
Right.
Many kind of tests we can.
Right. So Fatma, you deal with the respiratory therapy, right? Yes. So what sort of your job entails, and what sort of challenges do you undertake when you deal with the patients who need some respiratory care in your field?
If I talk about challenges, then we deal with very sick patients on daily basis. If we work in intensive care units, obviously, if a patient is on vent, I think the most rewarding thing about this field is to see some patients get better, and then they go home, they can meet their family, they can talk to their family. Obviously, in between that all situation, we are there with the patient, with their families, obviously to take care of them.
Also, Fatima, we would love to know what mechanical ventilation is, and also the types of ventilation, because as lay people, we don't really know what types of ventilation are there, because what we've heard as an outline, there are invasive types, there are non-invasive types. Could you give us a highlight on that?
If you want to understand it in a layman language, then it is basically artificial lung machine, artificial breathing machine. Obviously, there are when a patient is on ventilator, he or she is obviously sedated or in a relaxed state. So machine is doing all the work, is giving all the breaths, all the breathing, all the physiology is transferred to the vent. Basically, natural physiology is transferred artificially. So basically, is an artificial lung machine.
And what about the invasive and non-invasive types?
There are two kinds of ventilation. non-invasive is basically something that is not inside you, it is outside, it is from the outside. So they are kind of ventilation that are provided from the masks or nasal cannulas or this kind of interfaces. This is called basically non-invasive. If you put the tube inside the airway, that is invasive. That is basically a mechanical ventilator.
Right.
Right, because obviously intubation you're talking about, intubation. Right? Because my wife happens to be an intensivist, so usually what happens is that she works in the neonatal ICU. It's she who gets to decide when to intubate the patient, when not to intubate. So where does the role of an RT come over there?
Obviously, we work with intensivists, we work with pulmonologists. Obviously, there's a team role in all of that, when to put the patient on ventilator and when to put patient out of the ventilator.
Right.
We assess patients, which patients needs to be on non-invasive, then which patient needs to go on invasive ventilation.
I see.
There's the role. And we manage the non-invasive machines, we manage invasive machine. If a patient is intubated, then we are there to manage, to change everything, and obviously intensivists are there, but we are with them, basically dealing with all the issues, with breathing issues, what changes I need to make, what are the tests.
And you specialize in the machinery which is being
basically
used, right?
Ventilator is our field.
That's your field. Right. Also, when we talk about extubation, right, how do you decide whether the extubation trial is to be given to a patient and he is to be or she is to be taken off the ventilator?
There's a certain criteria.
Right.
We give weaning trials. There are some parameters which we see if a patient is meeting those criteria or not. If we basically give trials on daily basis, but obviously if one thing is okay and the other thing is okay, we progressively go to extubation.
So do you run tests for that, like the blood gases?
Basically, we see some parameters which are on the ventilator.
On the ventilator, yes. Okay.
Some are the blood tests, some are on the ventilator, some are other scorings. There's a lot of parameters we need to see for that.
Because obviously, I'm so sorry.
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Because we've seen the usage of ventilators a lot when it came to the COVID-19, right? Yes. And the role of the RT, I think, got really highlighted back in COVID-19, because now when we see the whole team, the role of the RT is quite important when it comes to ventilators.
Yes.
Also, there are certain myths about ventilators, that once you go on a ventilator, you will never come back. So what is the prognosis like in the neonates, in children, in adults? Could you,
See, the thing is, ventilator is an artificial, just I told you.
Yes.
It's an artificial machine. It has nothing to do with the primary disease.
All right.
Ventilators will just give some rest to the lungs while all the other issues recover. It can be because of some medications or anything else, but ventilator itself has nothing to do with the primary disease. Other than that, if it is from the lung. There are some many kind of diseases which are primary from the lung, and there are some diseases which affect lung, but they are not primarily from the lung. So ventilator is basically a machine which will give some rest to the patient while the disease recovers itself.
Right. So Fatma, since you are the therapist and you've been dealing with people, and the nature of your job is that you have to put people on the ventilators, and you told us that they are artificial lungs, right? And in the COVID, Fahim, we saw that there were really brutal and heartbreaking scenes where the doctors had to decide who to give that ventilator and who not to give, because shortness of the breath was one of the symptoms of the COVID. And that is why I say that doctors and all of these paramedical staff, they were the unsung heroes during the COVID time, because their job was very difficult, dealing with an enemy that was invisible to the naked eye. So Fatma, did you ever encounter such sort of situation where you have to decide which patient to go for and which not to go for, because it was a very difficult situation?
It's a very difficult decision,
yes. It is very difficult.
And how does that impact your health, and how do you deal with all of that? Or because obviously people have this tendency that they transfer trauma to you, or you are affected by their energies in the workspaces.
We faced this issue during COVID. Basically, there were a lot of patients, but we obviously, our goal was to give non-invasive ventilation to all of them. Obviously, we had to increase our machinery, we had to increase our equipments, but obviously our job was that we have to see if that we have to work on that. The patient should not go on ventilator, because obviously it was COVID disease was so progressive on the lung that we were not able to take patients out of the ventilator. So we decided that much of the patients should be on non-invasive ventilation as long as we can manage them on that. And many patients which need ventilator, obviously they need ventilator.
Right. Well, Fatima, I must thank you for coming in here and giving us such valuable information, because obviously this is one term that not a lot of lay people are familiar with, respiratory therapists, because most of the people, they're familiar with a chest specialist or a pulmonologist or an anesthetist. But when it comes to a respiratory therapist, we think once, and first of all we think, okay, respiratory diseases perhaps, asthma perhaps, but this is something really technical. And I think all the ICUs now, they require a respiratory therapist, because the role is quite important, it's quite big. So yes, we wish you the best of luck, Fatima, in all the future endeavors, and we hope that you continue saving more and more lives, and obviously that's going to give you a lot of satisfaction, a lot of mental reward, and a lot of dopamine rush that I've done something for humanity. We hope that you keep on doing that. And now, Hajra, as I was mentioning at the beginning of the program, that today I feel very happy, so I must take this opportunity to wish two people a very happy birthday. First of all, we have Minal Nadeem. It's Minal Nadeem's birthday. Minal, a very, very, very happy birthday to you. May you have many more, and I hope you get a lot of gifts from your parents and a huge cake.
And we hope and pray that this little angel grows up to be a wonderful human being and contributes towards our society in a very healthy and productive manner. So happy birthday to you, Minal, and may you have many, many more, and may you have many happy years to enjoy and celebrate. And second birthday is the birthday of a person who used to intern with us, Atiq Rahman. Happy birthday, Atiq. Atiq was a very hard-working guy, and we wish and pray for him that wherever he is, through his hard work, through his sheer dent and the determination.
So he still is a hard-working guy, right?
Yes, he still is a hard-working guy. He makes his name and creates an impression on people. So happy birthday to you, Atiq, and may you have many, many more, and may you have successful years to come.
So happy birthday to all the angels on this earth, the beautiful angels and the wonderful people who are hardworking. Happy birthday once again. So this was our program for today, the United Nations Day. We were also observing the Polio Eradication Day. We also spoke to a respiratory therapist. I hope you learned a thing or two from our program, because we did. And obviously these are ongoing and progressive discussions. Obviously the science is growing, technology is growing. We will keep on having these discussions as the time passes by. You guys, till then, take care of yourselves. We're going to see you tomorrow. Have a lovely, lovely, lovely day ahead. Until then,
it's a goodbye. Allah Hafiz and good morning.
Good morning.